Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are joined by Dr Supriya McKenna, a leading expert in the field of narcissistic relationships, as we look at how to parent alongside a narcissist. Dr Supriya started her career as a GP and health writer, and now works as a writer, coach, and trainer exclusively in the area of narcissistic relationships. Dr. McKenna directly helps those who have fallen victim to all types of narcissistic abuse, including in the area of separation and divorce. She also trains family law professionals at all levels in how to recognise and manage these personality disordered types. She is the author of the brand new book, The Narcissist Trap, The Mind-Bending Pull of the Great Pretenders, and of the Amazon #1 bestseller, Divorcing a Narcissist, The Lure, the Loss and the Law, with legal contributions from solicitor Karen Walker. She narrates the audiobook of the same name, and she conceived Narcissism and Family Law, a practitioner's guide for family lawyers, which she co-authored with Karen. Dr. Supriya also writes a monthly feature about narcissism for Reader's Digest and is a media commentator on the subject. So welcome again, Dr. Supriya. Obviously, third time now on the Stowe Talks podcast, because the advice you give is just brilliant. And we always ask for you to come back on and cover different subjects. So today we're going to be looking at parenting. So perhaps we could start with, do different rules or parenting rules apply if your co-parent is a narcissist?
Yes, very definitely. Yeah. So firstly, it's really important to understand that we're talking about real narcissism. So we're talking about someone who would qualify for a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, which actually means that their brains are wired differently to a person who doesn't have narcissism, an ordinary person. And that's the problem. That's where the problem lies when you're dealing with trying to co-parent with a narcissist, because they have totally different drivers to people who don't have narcissistic personality disorder. And that means that they don't actually want to co-parent. What they want to do is counter-parent. So that means that they want to do the exact opposite of what the other parent wants. And so it's really difficult for people who are in this situation, the other co-parent, because you can't co-parent because they don't want to co-parent. And you have to realize that that's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's their brain wiring. And the real issue that we have here is that nobody gets that. So social workers will blame you, and they'll blame you both. They'll suggest co-parenting courses. They'll think that family therapy can work. And actually, that's an abusive situation to put you into with a narcissist. And that they don't get the fact that there's an underlying personality disorder, which is actually running the show rather than conflict between the couples. And they have this whole "it takes two to tango" mentality, which is really, really difficult because there is no training in personality disorders, unfortunately, kind of really for lots of professionals within the kind of family court system.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there almost ends up being a little bit of victim blaming sometimes because of that. You reference the different drivers that narcissists have. Now, if for anyone who's coming fresh to this podcast and hasn't listened to the previous two that Supriya's very kindly done with us, might be a good time to pause there and go back and listen to those two, because Supriya goes in to great depth in both of those about, firstly, separating from a narcissist and then post-separation abuse, which will deal with that in a lot of detail. But I think it would be helpful just to have a kind of brief kind of dive into what it is that does drive a narcissist to behave in the way that they do.
Yeah, I think it is really important, because if you don't understand this very basic bit, and I'll just sort of go through that fairly quickly, you've got to really understand this, because it's the basis of why they behave so difficult with such, such difficult behaviours. Essentially, a narcissist has low self-esteem underneath it all. So what they do is they put out a false persona to the outside world, an image. And they need that false persona to, they hide behind it, actually. It's like a sort of armor. It's like a shield. So they hide behind this false persona, and they need other people to believe in that false persona, because other people's belief, external validation in that false persona, keeps it whole. And it means that if other people believe in it, they can believe in it themselves. So they need constant attention and external validation to keep this false persona alive and whole, so that it can protect them from their own feelings of low self-esteem and worthlessness and shame and inadequacy. And they might not look like that. In fact, the false persona is usually, very different to someone who looks like they've got low self-esteem. So that's what throws people off the scent, if you don't know about narcissism. So that external validation that they need, that constant external validation, is called narcissistic supply. And essentially, a narcissist will get that from attention and adoration, or they'll get it from drama, conflict, and by instilling fear in their ex or anyone else. And any emotional reaction actually will give a bit of a hit of narcissistic supply. So that's what's going on. That's what a narcissist needs. They're driven by this need for constant narcissistic supply. And I always sort of tell people to think of a narcissist as storing their narcissistic supply in a bucket which has a hole in it. So if you imagine it's stored in a bucket with a hole in it, so it's constantly draining away. But what they need to do is actually keep the level in their bucket at a certain level. If it goes below that, then their shield, that false persona that protects them, actually weakens. And then they start to feel how they really feel about themselves. They feel that shame, they feel that worthlessness. And to a narcissist, that feels like an existential crisis. It's unbearable. That's the thing that they're trying to avoid feeling. So what happens is that they react with rage. So as soon as the levels go down in that bucket, if they don't get enough attention or adoration or drama or conflict, or they don't scare their spouse enough or ex enough, the levels drop and they react with narcissistic rage. And everybody who's been in a relationship with a narcissist will recognize rage. And it doesn't even have to be the kind of shouty kind of rage. It can be a quiet sort of psychopathic kind of fury. But that rage will basically lead to the levels in the bucket going up really quickly because they'll get attention from it. They'll cause drama and there'll be conflict. And of course, whoever's watching will be scared. So that's a brilliant way of getting the narcissistic supply levels back up in the bucket. And they don't know that any of this is happening, by the way. So if you imagine that loads of people are constantly pouring into that bucket, everyone they know is pouring into that bucket. The biggest source of supply, and the biggest watering can, if you imagine, pouring into that bucket, who is pouring at the fastest rate, who is the most reliable source of supply as well, was their former partner. And what happens is that when you get divorced or during the divorce process, regardless of who left who, that partner is now out of play. They're not pouring into the bucket. And so, of course, there's a drop in the levels. And that's what's driving all of these behaviors. It's the need to get the levels in the bucket up. And so they use the children as tools and as excuses and reasons to get supply from their ex. That's what they're using the children for, to get that attention, to cause the drama, the conflict, and to scare them. And of course, also, there are other things that lead to that. So if their ex left them, they've been injured essentially, and they've been abandoned, and they want to kind of punish their ex for that. So that leads to problems as well. That leads to these behaviors. They've got no empathy or very low empathy. So they can't care about how, this is someone you were potentially married to for decades, but they don't care about they can't care about how that person feels about their behaviors. It just doesn't matter. They can't care. And also, once their spouse has fallen off their pedestal, they can't see them as being a blend of good or bad. So basically, you're either all good or you're all bad to a narcissist. And that's the same with them. They're either all good or all bad. So it's called a lack of whole object relations in psychological terms. So basically, once you've divorced or you've left your narcissistic ex, or they've left you, it doesn't matter, you're all bad and you deserve to be taken down. And of course, they also have a massive need to control and a need to win, because they need to feel powerful and special to keep that shield, that false persona up and whole and protecting them. So that's what this is actually all about.
Yeah. And these behaviours, they're all incredibly difficult to deal with, aren't they? We're talking about low empathy, need to control, need to win, trying to, co-parenting is almost meant to be a relationship of give and take, and you're not going to have that within these types of relationships. But is there a stage where it ever gets easier to deal with a narcissist?
The narcissist won't get any easier, but your reactions, well, there's actually two things, two strands of this. So how you deal with it can make it easier, as in you can get used to it and you can find ways to deal with it. But also the narcissist, if you don't give enough supply and they happen to go and get supply from someone else because of that, because they do need that supply, that narcissistic supply, it can be that they get a bit better at that point if they've got someone else to get the supply from. But that's not always the case. And sometimes, if they lose their job, or if they lose their next partner or whatever, they will come back to you quite often because you're an easy source of supply. So they can they can just keep coming back. So some of them, if you manage them, if you really are consistent with not giving them any supply, not showing any fear, you can make them go away largely, but they will find excuses every now and then to come back. And some of them, a minority, will just keep coming back no matter what you do until the children are basically 18 or 16. And I think I really want to say, it's really important to say, they're not going to get to the point where, you can go to birthday parties together. You won't be worried about attending your children's weddings together. You can, have success, go to graduation ceremonies and all of those things. That's never going to happen with a real narcissist. And they're not going to come in for a cup of tea and, go on holiday with you guys. That's just never going to happen with a real narcissist. So they're never going to get better to that extent. It's just that they might go away. That's the best you can hope for, is that they'll largely go away. And that really is the best you can hope for.
So, I mean, it's obviously, this is the point in the podcast where anyone listening thinks, oh my God, this sounds really depressing. And there is stuff that you can do. There are methods and tips and things. We'll probably come back to those in a little bit, because I think there's a few other points we need to cover first. But just in case anyone's thinking, oh my goodness, this is forever, which is a really tough thing to hear, but is also something that, forewarned is forearmed. So hopefully you can help and plan around that. But before we get into that, I think the drivers are all really interesting. But what are the behaviours? How does that exhibit itself? What behaviours will narcissists carry out?
Yeah. So they are absolutely, just like the behaviours in the marriage. Actually, if you look at what the behaviours were in the marriage, cookie cutter behaviours, they all do the same things. It's exactly the same with how they behave post-separation. So essentially, they're using the children as weapons of post-separation abuse in order to get narcissistic supply. And what you can break those things down into, I tend to break them down to three things. So emotional abuse, financial abuse, and legal abuse, using the children as weapons. So one of the things they do all the time is trying to have contact with you as their ex, to try to get your grade A premium narcissistic supply. So they're constantly trying to have contact with you. So they'll use the children as excuses to have all sorts of types of contact. So physical contact, where they never bothered to, as in being in the same space, where they didn't really bother to show interest in things like that before. So to do with the children. So they'll turn up to school events. They might turn up to parents' evenings when they never bothered before because they want to be there next to you. They'll want, this one, joint children's birthday parties. They do this all the time. They send emails. Oh, what are we going to do for little Felix's birthday party? He wants us both to be there. And they kind of try and guilt trip you so that you're in the same space as them. And let's arrange it together. That's all to get narcissistic supply. Hospital appointments, that's a brilliant one. One that's horrible is when they turn up to school runs. I had one case, it was terrible, and we had a non-molestation order in the end. He would turn up, the narcissist was a male in this case, and he'd turn up to the school runs, never bothered to pick up the children before, but he'd sort of swing he wanted the child to be in between the two of them. They'd walked out, to the car, and they'd sort of swing the child. That's what he'd say. Well, let's swing the child, as we're walking down, hand in hand, down to the car. And it was so awful for her. But of course, anyone looking just thought, oh, that's nice.
It just looks like happy families, and that's presumably what the narcissist wants to project.
It's all about that, They do things with overnight bags as well. And I'm not happy to leave their overnight bag, do an exchange at school. I want to bring this to you, and you should come to me, and we should directly, because there's an iPad in there or whatever. Things have to be swapped directly. So they do that. So they're trying to get that kind of physical contact to get that narcissistic supply from your reactions, from your fear. And the other thing they do, again, to try and have contact with the ex is mediation. So they'll find an issue about the children, and then they'll go, oh, let's mediate. Let's sit in a room together with a mediator. And then I can just manipulate the mediator. I don't really want a resolution. I've just made this up as an excuse to see you. And then I can run rings around you and around the mediator, and I'll be clever and superior and brilliant, and you'll be scared, and it'll be marvellous. Narcissistic supply. So that's another one. And as I say, again, someone looking in on that would just think, well, they're trying to sort this out. They want mediation. They want to be reasonable. So you're on your own, you feel like you're going mad, basically. Harassment. So this is where they're and I'm talking about correspondence here. So it's the whole thing. They will just be constantly bombarding you with anything to do with the children, that they weren't interested in. A good one that I heard recently, which was a new one to me, is that the narcissist would contact the spouse and go, oh, what is, little, whatever, Jenny, let's call her Jenny. That's not a modern name, but we'll call her Jenny. What's little Jenny having? How are we choosing her school meals during the day? Because I need to do my meal planning so that when she's with me, I don't want her to double up and have fish pie twice in one day or whatever. I mean, he'd never cooked a meal in his life, but this guy it was a great way to sort of, and in correspondence as well, he just looks like a really caring parent. Issues at school as well. So any issues at school they'll use, and what are we going to do about their, I think they're struggling at school. I think they've got ADHD. I think they've got dyslexia. I think they've got autism. What are we going to do about this? We need meetings with the school, constantly trying to get that person in a room with them, basically. And they'll also do things like trying to just cause havoc by changing contact time. I can't do Thursday. Can we do this? And just always trying to get in touch, find a way to get in touch and change things and cause havoc. So if they're really high spectrum and they're clever as well, so they've got to be clever as well and actively manipulative. Not all narcissists are actively manipulative. They're just wired to manipulate, but the really clever ones can actually actively manipulate. And so they will actually use Our Family Wizard, which is a parenting app that I usually recommend for people who are dealing with narcissists, but they can actually use them as a weapon of abuse by doing that very clever thing of pretending to be interested in the welfare of the child and giving very reasonable sounding answers and asking reasonable sounding questions, which the spouse knows is not reasonable at all, but no one else can see that. So you've got to be quite careful. Most people, I think Our Family Wizard does work for, even when they are dealing with a narcissist. But if you've got a super clever one, and they can really sort of rein in the rage, in the written form, be slightly wary about that. That's what I'd say on that one. Of course, they're trying to exert control as well. So they'll do all sorts of things. They'll badmouth the other parent to the children. They'll call you names, had some awful names that have said to the children about the other parent recently. They'll ridicule you. They'll claim that you've taken all the money. And of course, parental alienation is a thing with narcissists. They do that. So they can actually turn the child against the other parent so much that they alienate the child from that parent. They're always trying to increase time with the children. Again, very often they had no interest whatsoever in the children before. And they're doing that just to punish their ex and cause fear and, of course, reduce any child maintenance that they need to that they're paying. And that's so common that narcissists will want 50-50 or more. Little manipulative tactics, a very common one to try to get the children to kind of voluntarily spend more time with them is to get a puppy or get a kitten. I see that all the time. It's unbelievable how common I see that. And they're not interested in the puppy or the kitten, and they can't really look after a puppy or a kitten, or put its needs ahead of their own. So that's interesting. Withholding consent to travel, lovely, that one. I actually had a case recently where a narcissistic spouse refused to let was put in correspondence, I refused to let you leave England. It wasn't even the UK. You're not allowed to leave England with the children. So that was outrageous. They won't return the children's passports if they're holding them, or if they've been away with them and they've got them, or they'll return them right at the very end, or it'll require a court application, because they love causing that control, and that you've got to then keep asking for them. That's contact, and they can just ignore you, or they can they can just keep coming back with correspondence about other things. It's wonderful narcissistic supply. Of course, they make false allegations as well about the non-narcissistic parent. So they'll do that to the police, they'll do that to social services, and they'll do things like they like to triangulate. They'll send you abusive emails, but they'll do it kind of via social services. They'll write to social services and they'll copy you in, or they'll write to the head mistress of the school and they'll copy you in, and they'll make all these allegations about you and your parenting in those emails that are going to these third parties. Another really common one is making school applications. So they'll make applications unilaterally without asking you, and they won't consider what's in the best interest of the individual child. The school might be near to them. It might be a school that's maybe expensive, and they can therefore get the other parent to pay for half of it or even more, which means that, they're financially abusing them as well, through the children. It always pretty much happens that there'll be issues with school, with making applications for school. So that kind of 11 plus, or if they're going at 13 or sixth form, or any of those times are just a nightmare, an absolute nightmare.
Do you see many attempts from narcissists to start doing homeschooling to pull them out of school? Is that something that ever crops up?
Yeah,
I seem to have had a spate of those recently in cases that I've been involved.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's with no real, like 2 days before term starts, never been floated before, and yeah, it got my narcissism spidey sense tingling.
Yes. Yeah, it really does happen. I've had one recently with a child who's autistic, and he's sort of behaving way worse than he normally would behave, because the narcissistic parent is actually basically kind of just he's getting him to a state before he goes to school, essentially, and he's just making things worse. He's not calming him down, so he's behaving badly at school, and now the school have agreed, we can't actually deal with him. But part of it, I think, is because he's been such a nightmare, the narcissist, constantly having scraps with the school, always fighting with them and being really unpleasant, saying, I'm going to make a formal complaint and all of this. So they're kind of just thinking, oh God, actually, let's just get rid of this child. So the child has actually been taken out of school, which is exactly what he wanted. And I think he wants now probably to get the mother to homeschool the child, because then she can't work, that's more control over her, and it just basically messes up her life. Whereas actually the child's kind of calm going to school with her on her days. Really difficult.
It's just awful. I mean, it's just absolute. It's damaging to children. It's weaponization of children. I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of other examples. I'm sure we can go through them, but how doesn't a narcissist love their child? Because that is not something that you could ever do if you love your child.
Not really is the answer. They can't really love. So a narcissist's love with everybody is conditional or transactional, and that does include their love for their children, unfortunately. And some people don't really get that. They think, oh no, they love them, they do love them, because they've done that kind of some narcissists do the Disney parent thing, where out in public they're the rugby coach, or they'll be really great with their children in front of people, essentially. And so people are always fooled by that, and they think, oh, but they do love them. But actually they can't love them. They don't love them. They can't put them first either. They can't put their needs first. So they see their children as being extensions of themselves. It's a really weird situation, because they see their children as being extensions of themselves. So if they're not feeling bad, then their child can't be feeling bad. They want the child to do what they want them to do. They want the child to be what they want them to be, to have what they want them to have. They can't see them as separate in some way. But then at the same time, they can actually abuse the child, as if just in all the ways that they abuse other people, which we've gone through in other podcasts. They use their children as well as to get narcissistic supply from onlookers. So hence that Disney thing. Wow, you're such an amazing dad. Wow, you're such an amazing mom. They'll use them to do that. So they're not actually, it's not through love. They're not putting Jocasta in the National Youth Orchestra because they love her. They're doing it because they want narcissistic supply from the admiration of other people.
Yeah, I mean, you use the term sort of Disney parenting, and it sounds as if they're very much putting on a show. It's all an act. It's all very superficial. So I guess the question is, can they be good parents?
No, I think is the short answer on that one. I mean, there are things they can do. Say if they value a child becoming the best tennis player at getting up to kind of a international level, that could be good for the child in theory, ultimately. Those types of things could be good, but actually it's where it's coming from. And overall, no, because, if you've got no empathy for your child, and if you're using them to get narcissistic supply, and if you can't actually recognize their needs and prioritize their needs, if you can't see them as an individual, recognize what they want out of life, and if you can't celebrate their successes with them, unless they're successes that reflect well on you, or kind of commiserate when things go wrong. That is not good parenting. And actually they will abuse their children. They will gaslight them. They will do all the things that they do to other people. They'll invalidate them. They'll devalue them behind closed doors, or sometimes not behind closed doors. They'll control them. And so actually narcissistic parenting is really bad for children.
I suppose there's a degree to which it's they can present good opportunities because it reflects well about them. You talk about being a tennis player or the National Youth Orchestra or whatever it may be, and I'm going to have to sound the klaxon on this one, because Donald Trump, who comes up every time we talk about narcissism, I guess his children get all these phenomenal opportunities to do various things in the other, but you can't imagine that there isn't some deep emotional scarring from the way that he has been with them. And we talk about Donald Trump on all of these narcissism podcasts, so I felt like we had to name check him. But I suppose people like that, who they get the amazing opportunities, and from afar you probably look at them and go, oh my God, isn't that amazing? Look, you've been put through private school, or you've done this, or what amazing opportunities you've had, without really understanding that comes with a backdrop of abusive behaviour that creates these scarrings, even though you've got the opportunities.
Yeah, and and also, of course, if you're brought up by a narcissist, there's a risk that you will become a narcissist, because you learn those behaviors, or you, because you've got to protect yourself from them, you develop strategies to protect yourself, and then those kind of become wired in. And that's how narcissism actually forms, by you trying to kind of cope with an upbringing that's adverse in some way. And these coping strategies become wired in and can present themselves as narcissism when you're an adult. They're not just scarred, they can actually become narcissists themselves. Not all, that doesn't happen to everybody. There are long-term consequences. They can, if you don't become a narcissist, you can attract narcissists because you're kind of attracted to the subconscious pull of the familiar. So you can attract a narcissistic partner as an adult and then go on to be narcissistically abused for decades or forever without realizing it, because there's a really strong chemistry there. Or, with any type of abusive parenting, you're going to be that people have eating disorders, depression, anxiety, substance abuse issues. Those are really, really common. Self-harm. It's so common. So we don't see any of that, do we? We don't see any of that in any of the kind of Trump children. We don't see behind the kind of facade. But what is really going on there? I don't think any of them would say, yeah, we had a great upbringing. But having said that, they were also brought up by their mother, I believe. And so it is possible, and I want to make this point very strongly, it is possible to mitigate, it's possible to lessen the effects of the narcissistic parent on the children as the other parent.
So how do you do that then? If you're the other parent, what do you do to counteract this kind of maelstrom of narcissism and awful behaviour and things? What are they, how do you try and co-parents if you can? What do you do?
We're talking about the kind of making up for the parenting deficiencies of the narcissist. So if we just kind of look at that first, basically, because I think that's the thing. When clients come to me, that's the thing they're most scared of. What's going to happen to the children, particularly if the narcissist has got 50-50 or even more. What's going to happen to the children? What can I do to stop the children from being damaged? And actually, there is a lot you can do. Because now you're in your separate homes, and you're no longer kind of having to enable the narcissist's behavior, because that's kind of what happened when you're living in the same home. What are you supposed to do? When they're behaving badly, you can't very well badmouth them in front of your child. And I'm not saying you do that when you're separated, but the fact that you're now in two different homes, hopefully, means that you can do things your way. So essentially, number one is you can model empathy. So you can show them empathy. You can teach them what empathy is, and you can teach them about emotions. So say, even if they're really little and you're reading a book with them, you can say, and how do you think that character felt at that time? And really go deep into naming emotions. A narcissist isn't going to do that. They don't do empathy and they don't do naming emotions. So that's actually going to help develop that child and protect them. And also, you've got to be the person that gives them really good boundaries. Because a narcissist, again, is unlikely. I mean, they're either going to have really controlling, outrageous boundaries. You are never going out ever. You're not wearing that. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. Really authoritarian. Or they'll just let them do whatever they want. So it's about finding that balance. It's about being bounded with them, because they need to know, they feel comfortable with rules, but having the type of rules where if they go, well, hang on, why do I have to be back by whatever 8:30 on a Friday when I'm now 15? You can negotiate with them, and that's called the authoritative parenting style. That's the one you want to go for, where you can actually go, actually thinking about it, you're right, maybe we could, extend that to 9:30, or maybe you could stay over at your friend's. It's that. So it's boundaries, but with flexibility. The other thing, of course, as I mentioned earlier, a narcissist, unless it reflects well on them, they're not going to celebrate their successes. They're never going to do that. They're not going to, when things go wrong, they're not going to commiserate with them, because they're not going to have any empathy for them. So again, that's about modeling that empathy and seeing them as individuals. They have their own wants, they have their own needs, they have their own preferences. You, as a non-narcissistic parent, will be able to see those and respect them. See that child as an individual. I mean, this is just what normal people do anyway. But remember that you're trying to show the difference between you and the narcissist, and they will come to see that. You're teaching them how to assert their boundaries as well. It's all very well you having boundaries, but they've got to have boundaries. You've got to teach, because that will protect them as well from the narcissist. So they've got to be able to learn how to say no, and draw the line. And you've got to show them that you respect their boundaries. So again, when their narcissistic parent doesn't, they go, oh, hang on a minute. It's all about, at the end of the day, becoming securely attached to that child. An attachment where they know that they're safe with you 100%. And even if you tell them off, even if they know they can come to you, they're very securely attached. That's all you need. You only need one parent or one secure attachment to not become a narcissist. That's all that children need. And there's been some good research on that. I'm not just making this up. So I think what this is about is them knowing the difference between the two of your kind of parenting styles, and knowing who they trust. And that will come with time. And then eventually what happens is that they very often vote with their feet. They just walk out the door, and they don't go back basically to the narcissistic parent, even if the narcissistic parent was the one that had them for the majority of the time. So that quite often happens, unless, of course, they've been successfully alienated from the other parent. And it's you've got to be the boring parent. You've got to be consistent. They might be the fun parent, goes on the expensive holidays and, woo, let's do this. But they will trust you and value your consistency. So that's how I think you kind of help with that side of it with the children. Those things are really important, but those things are the things that you've got power over. And they're just more important than you could probably ever imagine. Probably the most important thing that I'm going to say, really, as we're speaking about this, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, isn't it, that people do feel empowered, that they do feel like, oh, because I'm dealing with a narcissist, I can't do anything about it. To know that actually you can make a huge difference to your children's upbringing, their outcomes, their possibility of them becoming narcissists themselves actually is something that's in your control.
Yeah.
You spoke at the beginning about how often partners or ex-partners are the major supply for narcissistic supply. So from a practical level, if you're co-parenting with a narcissist, how do you turn that supply off? What can you do to make sure that they're not getting that from you?
Firstly, you've got to be realistic about this. It's really important to understand, yes, it's about reducing supply, but it's a combination. Because I think lots of people think, oh, well, all you need to do is reduce their narcissistic supply and they'll go away and that's going to be the end of it. But actually also you've got to be boundaried with them. You've got to tell them what you are and aren't prepared to accept, or you've got to show them, possibly not tell them, show them. And you've got to look fearless as well, because remember, they're feeding off your fear. And actually, eventually, it'd be quite nice to actually become fearless. That takes a while, though. And the other thing that you can do is become a bit more narcissistic yourself. So, for example, if you were attracted to a narcissist, it's quite likely that you, and I'm not victim blaming here, some people see this as victim blaming, it's not, you have certain traits, just as the narcissist has certain traits, you have certain traits that they saw in you and thought, ooh, this would be a good victim for me, possibly not consciously. You're probably a giver, you're probably a rescuer, you probably have lots of empathy, you probably believe that love conquers all. So you probably give and give and give while the narcissist takes and takes and takes. So it's really important to think, well, hang on, what would a narcissist do in this situation? And they do something outrageous. And you've got to kind of slide up the scale a bit and become a bit more narcissistic yourself. I'm not saying become a narcissist, but always consider in any situation where things are going wrong with a narcissist, what would the narcissist do? And then if what could you, it just will help inform you and your behavior if you can try to become a little bit more narcissistic yourself. But what I really want to talk about is how you're actually going to reduce that. You asked me about narcissistic supply. So let's deal with that first. So the first thing is to use a type of parenting called parallel parenting. And so what that means, and you can Google that, but basically what that means is that you're trying to get to as close as having no contact with them as possible, because that's the gold standard, no contact. So you want to try to get as close to that as you possibly can. So the way that you do that is basically you let the rules of each house apply. If they're not going to do homework with the child, there's nothing you can do about it, I'm afraid. You can't make them do homework. If they want to be vegetarian or not, the other way around, and you do, well, with the child, you have to let that be. Whatever activities they choose to do with the child, you don't have a say in it. You try and keep everything absolutely separate. So, and it's horrible because you feel like you're throwing the children into the lion's den, but you just have to accept that, because it's about really splitting contact with them as much as you can so that the children aren't placed in the middle of the conflict. So it really does work. This stuff does work. But you have to give up your control, which is really hard, but you have to give up any sense of you having any control when they're with a narcissistic parent.
It's so difficult to do that, though, isn't it? To accept that, and you are sending your children to someone who is fundamentally dangerous and abusive, and to go, well, I can't do anything about that. It requires the level of sort of self-control and I don't know, almost implacability that requires is slightly beyond me. It's incredibly impressive to be able to get to that point, I think.
It's really, really difficult, but the children do get older. I mean, that's the thing. The children do get older, and if you're doing all the other things that I mentioned before, they do get to see what's really going on, and they do get to start to learn, what's right and what's wrong, what kind of behaviours are right and what's wrong. It's things like, there's always an issue with cycle helmets, and I always hear this. They're always really unsafe, narcissists. It's when the child is going, mummy or daddy, can I take my cycle helmet to mummy or daddy's house because he or she never lets me wear one? It's horrible for them. Why should they be taking these responsibilities on perhaps an inappropriately early age? But actually, that's what tends to happen. They tend to start to sort of look out for themselves, really, or look out for their siblings, which again, I say it's not right, but that is actually how it is. But you have to try to just step back, and yeah, it is really, really bad. And nobody really understands that. The courts don't understand, as I say, what narcissism is, really. Social workers don't get it. CAFCAS officers don't get it. So they just sort of, and actually, this concept of parallel parenting, I was giving a talk last week, and I've done this before. I always try and take opportunities when I've got a load of lawyers in a room. So if I've got a few hundred lawyers in a room, I go, how many of you have heard of parallel parenting? And I do the same if I've got social workers in a room. And so I had 220 people in the room last week, and only 5 hands went up. So only 5 people have heard of the method that I'm telling you works with narcissists. So that sucks, really, doesn't it? I mean, it absolutely sucks that even the social workers don't get it, because this is what I'm trying to tell you to do.
There's a long way to go in terms of knowledge and understanding, and I know I've learned a huge amount from listening to you and reading some of your stuff, and over the past couple of years, and the profession and sort of children's services have got a long way to go in recognising these behaviours, and the behaviours are often so subtle.
Yeah,
a lot of the behaviours that you've mentioned, we hear 1 or 2 of them all the time. 1 or 2 in a case, but that doesn't make a narcissist, does it?
That is so, you've just said something really majorly important, because it's not 1 or 2. When you're dealing with a real narcissist, it's all of the behaviours. I sort of whip through sort of some of the stuff they do to emotionally abuse you, but there's all the legal abuse as well. There's the financial abuse that they'll do as well, and they'll do all of these things. They won't pay for extracurricular activities or for school. They won't contribute to the dentist or school trips or learning disability assessments. I had one, and how's this for financial abuse? So the child who is 6 broke something in the narcissistic father's house, and was so kind of worried about this that he told the narcissistic father that he'd pay, because the narcissistic father was absolutely really furious about it. And so this was an excuse to get in touch with the mother and say, child is offered to pay for this thing that was broken, you'll have to take this much money out of the child's piggy bank and make sure that you send this to me. And of course, the money in the piggy bank was coming from her and from her family and had nothing to do with him. He was literally taking money from the child in that kind of really direct way by emotionally abusing the child. So it's things like that that are subtle. If they've got the child and they're wearing your school uniform that you've bought, they'll throw it away. Oh, it was it was frayed. There was a hole in the chute, which is just, it could be brand new stuff. They'll throw it away. How dare you send the children to school in this when it's absolutely brand new, and they'll just chuck it away. They'll keep things, like they'll keep toys, or I remember a narcissist borrowing the bikes for the children and just never returning them. So again, then the other parent has to buy some more bikes because you don't want to have a massive conflict with them. And yeah, there's all sorts of things they'll do. They'll lose things if they go on holiday with them. And I've already mentioned the things like the applications to schools, private schools, theatre schools. They're desperate to financially abuse the other party that way. Also, they'll get the child to steal things from your house. That laptop charger is mine, so can you go and get it, please, and just put it in your bag? And they'll literally get them to steal things from your house. And then, of course, there's legal abuse as well. So, and as you know, to make your point here, they do a lot of these things. They don't just do one or two; they do a lot. So obviously with the legal abuse, they'll always be trying to get into mediation. I've already said that. They'll do things like they'll try to relocate to a different part of the country and make court applications that way. They'll make loads of court applications to try and change the child arrangements order, the contact agreement. They'll try and stop people from seeing them. They'll try and stop you from going on holiday. They'll try and stop treatments or vaccinations, or they'll try and force things to happen with specific issue applications. They'll try and force them to go to schools. They'll try and force them to allow the other parent to get them to go on a holiday. They'll try and force them to get a diagnosis that isn't really necessary. They'll make child abduction applications if you've gone abroad. They'll claim that you didn't get their permission. And the court takes these things seriously. So it's ridiculous. The court goes, oh, okay, well, you've made that application, so we ought to hear your side of the story, even though there's been loads of applications made. It's quite obvious that these are just vexatious. The court goes, no, we must listen to all of these. And court has the power to say you can't make any more applications with this without us kind of looking at them first and deciding whether we'll proceed with it. But often, even when that's in place, they still go, oh, no, we need to take it seriously. So, yeah, a lot of these things will happen.
Those orders are made very sparingly, very, very sparingly. And I think, I'd like to think, as judicial awareness of narcissism and practitioner awareness, lawyers speaking to clients, and when they hear, I think my partner's a narcissist, engaging with that and kind of forming your own assessment. And is it a case where it has to be a case, that it's a narcissist case where everything is an issue. Literally everything is an issue. If you can agree some stuff and there's issues about some things, it's probably not. Unless they have a very, very good lawyer who can really steer them. But even then, it's that every single thing is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think, as there's better practitioner, better judicial awareness, hopefully these Section 91 orders are called, which prevent vexatious applications, become more frequent. Obviously, we could kind of talk all day. I think there's so much to do. Probably finish with some top tips in the way that we usually do, but something I'm really interested in. Let's go back to your piggy bank example, which is really awful. Just really awful. And that poor kid. What do you do if your child's come back and had that piggy bank experience and you're the non-narcissist parent? How do you then, deal with your child when that parent has reacted so badly towards the child? How do you pick them up again?
It's really, really hard. It's really, really hard. The first thing to do is to definitely not enable the abuse, because that's what you were probably doing when you were married to them, when you were in the same house as them. And so many people say, oh, no, your father loves you very much. Your mother loves you very much. They didn't mean it. And they were only late because of this, or I'm sure they had a good reason. And you shouldn't ever say that, because you're gaslighting your own child, because narcissists can't love, as I've already said, not, it's transactional or conditional. So that's the first thing. Step one, do not enable the narcissist behavior. But the way to do it, really, because you don't want to be bad mouthing the narcissist, but you want to know how their behavior made them feel. That's the angle. How did you feel about that? How did you feel about that when you broke the whatever and you felt you should offer to pay for it. How were you feeling at that time? And if they trust you, they'll say, well, I felt scared, or I felt whatever. That's why I did it. I felt I was wrong, or I felt bad. I felt like a bad person. And you can then validate their feelings and obviously say, well, and tell the truth, make them look at it in another way. But you're not bad. It was just an accident or whatever. But you're not bad mouthing the narcissist. You're just taking their feelings and focusing on those, and then validating their feelings and saying, I'm really sorry you felt that way, but actually it wasn't your fault, and you didn't need to feel that way, and you didn't need to offer, and daddy can afford to pay for whatever it was, and you're just 6 and you don't need to pay for that at all. You don't need to, all the things that you've been saving up in your piggy bank, you don't need to give that away. Don't worry, kind of thing. And when the narcissist lies about you, if the children are older, and the narcissist will lie about you all the time, there'll be loads of lies, you will probably have evidence to the contrary. So when they're 15, 16 or older, you can show them that evidence. I mean, I've had children at sort of 14, 15 go, look, narcissistic mother, I'm remembering, who the child mostly lived with for most of the time, the vast majority of the time. And this particular child said, look, mum's saying you've said this, this and this. And he'd realised at this time that perhaps this wasn't actually true. He was beginning to realise that perhaps he couldn't rely upon everything she was saying. And he said, did you say that in an email? And so the father showed him the emails. And it didn't take long. This kind of kept happening for a little while. But he showed them, because the child said, can I see the emails? And it was right that he showed them. Because he was actually his emails were perfect. There were no, in fact, I was writing them, to be honest. So there was no, that's normally what happens when we're trying to sort of get rid of a narcissist. I tend to sort of quite often write the emails for the clients. So I'm not giving them supply, basically. But that worked. That really showed that child, hang on, dad didn't do any of those things at all. And that was really powerful for that child, who did in fact walk out and move in with his father after a couple of years. So there's things like that you can do. But I just do want to briefly go into the idea of reducing their narcissistic supply and communicating with them, because this is really, 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 really important. So I want to tell you, people out there listening, the aim is to never, ever see your narcissist in person ever again. And I really mean that. That's what you're going for. So never have a video call with them. Never have a phone call with them. They'll gauge your emotional reaction from your voice or from dilated pupil, a slight raised eyebrow, just a bit of fear, just anything. They'll see that, and that will give them supply. And then they'll draw you into a row because they'll work off your reactions, even if they're tiny. So if you do ever see them in person, you need to get out of there as soon as you can, so that they can't actually pick up on your cues of your fear. And for the time that you're there, and we've mentioned the grey rock technique before, use the grey rock technique. I think it's go back, I think it's the first podcast episode that we talk about that. Yep. The grey rock technique is brilliant. Honestly, it's brilliant. So please do look that up. And also, when we're talking about communicating with them, instead of letting them bombard you with WhatsApps and texts and instant messaging things from all over the place and emails, you just need, and phone calls, one platform, preferably email, so that you don't give them an instant response, so you're not tempted to just get into the row, and block them from everything else. Or our Family Wizard, of course, the parenting app, if you haven't got a really, really high spectrum one, is very good, because you can do lots of other things on there as well. Basically, it stops you from having to communicate with them directly on things, because you can just put information up, almost like penning it to a message board. You can just put it up there and they can see it, and then they can't go, what's Felix's shoe size? Because I'm going to buy him trainers because you're a bad parent and you haven't got him any, and whatever. There'll always be a bit of that going on in any message. The information will be there. You can preempt it and put it up there, and then you don't have to have any kind of back and forth communication with them. But as I say, only if they're not really, really, really clever and manipulative. The other thing you've got to know about is dealing with their written communications. And the first thing you've got to know is it is totally normal, 100% normal, to be thrown into a stress response when you get a text or an email or something with a post from your narcissistic ex. Every single person is triggered into a massive stress response, into a panic. It's a physiological response. The amygdala is triggered in the brain because the brain thinks this is a threat to my life. That's what the brain has learned to think it is. So it really, the adrenaline and cortisol, all the stress hormones are released. And so it's totally normal. Don't think you're going mad. This happens to every single person. I can't tell you. And it's normal. So it's okay. It's horrible, but it's okay. And you need a plan. You need a plan for every communication you get from the narcissist so you don't freak out. The first thing you need to do is terminate that stress response, certainly before replying. So don't reply when you're stressed. Don't do it. And how you do that? Number one, really simple, notice how you're feeling. So it's a physiological reaction. Have you got sweaty palms? Have you got palpitations? Have you got chest pain? Are you breathing really fast? Are you feeling panic or dread? If you can sit back and go, okay, what am I feeling? And you'll notice that your thoughts are racing and all. My heart's beating fast. List them off, and that will just help to actually terminate the stress response. It really, really does work. And the other thing you can do is that's what's known as a sympathetic system response. So there's a parasympathetic nervous system which works in opposition to the sympathetic system. So you can actually engage your parasympathetic nervous system. And there's ways of doing that. And a really quick and effective way of doing that is by using a thing called a physiological sigh. So what that does is what you do is you take a deep breath in, then you take another breath in. So it's 2 breaths in a row. So you filled up your lungs, and then you very, very, very slowly breathe out. And you do that a few times, 5 times, 6 times, and that actually stimulates the parasympathetic system and calms things down. It lowers your heart rate. It gets the blood flowing back to your brain. You'll notice in a panic response, the blood isn't going anywhere near your brain. You can't think straight because the blood's been diverted. It's been diverted to your muscles, so you can fight or run away. Or that's what this kind of response is. It's to save your life. It's because the brain thinks you're being attacked by a tiger. So physiological sigh. Box breathing, I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but I would definitely look into that. Google that. Box breathing works. It's just a type of breathing that does the same thing. It engages the parasympathetic system. Even touching your lips will engage the parasympathetic system, not as much as the sighing, the breathing things. Breathing into a paper bag helps because you increase the carbon dioxide, and that will also terminate a panic, essentially. So that's once you've done that, once you're in a good state and you're okay, and it might take a few hours to calm down. My next best tip is to copy and paste their message into a 5-year-old's handwriting font. I'm not kidding. This is brilliant. This is brilliant. And there's a great one called Tommy on the internet. So look that one up. And it's a free one. You can download that for free. So you copy and paste it, their ridiculous ranting accusatory message where they're threatening all sorts of things into a 5-year-old handwriting font. And suddenly you think, hang on a minute, because this is what it is. This is a toddler throwing all their toys out of the pram, contradictory, ranting rubbish, and threatening you, and you'll see it for what it is. Oh my God, this is a child, because emotionally it is a child. And so that really helps, because then you can see, which bit do I actually need to deal with? And it's only really the kind of logistics for the children that you'll need to deal with. So there'll be all these kind of superfluous rants about an accusation, you're a bad person, and I'm going to take you down, and how dare you destroy the children, like all of these things. And you can just go, that's all rubbish, that's all. Oh, right, yes. Pickup will be 3 p.m. on Wednesday. That's the bit that matters. And all the other stuff is just rubbish. And there's a brilliant acronym as well for that, which I'd like you to kind of just remember, which is JADE. So don't jade. Don't justify in your response. Don't argue with them. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain. Even if you've got all your mates around you and your family go, you can't let him or her get away with that. You've got to say something. They don't understand this because thankfully they probably haven't been in this situation. Thankfully for them. Don't listen to other people on this. Don't jade. Don't justify, argue, or defend yourself or explain in your communication with the narcissist. Just deal with the logistical points. And actually, another tip is, if you can, just to calm the narcissist a bit, find something to agree with in what they've actually said. And so things like they'll go, our children deserve better. And you can go, I agree. We are agreed. If you use we, that's a better way to. So we are agreed that the children deserve better. And they'll go, oh, okay, I was right. This person's saying I'm right. Oh, I've won. I've won to a degree. So that's good for the narcissist. It might calm the rage down a bit. Use we, if you get that collaborative pronoun, if you can. And when you're responding, use the smallest number of words you can, absolutely the smallest, because any little thing will give them, if you go on a bit, they'll get a bit of supply from that. Don't send it until you've checked it, taken any heat or anger or fear or outrage or disappointment, just don't send it until all of that's gone. So either wait a few hours or get a friend to check it over, if you trust them to do that. And don't use any emotions at all in your response. And even things like, so people go, I didn't use any emotions. And I look at what they've written and go, because they've written, I am saddened that you have chosen to do this, or I am disappointed that I am troubled. And lawyers do this as well. And it's just like, no, please. No.
I was going to say that, I'm disappointed. That sounds like a lawyer letter.
It really is. I am troubled. My client is troubled by. My client is saddened by. My client is disappointed by. Well, what's the narcissist on the other end going to do with that? They're going to go, yes, because that was the point. I'm going to do more of that then. Thank you very much. So lawyers shouldn't be giving away their clients' emotions either. Absolutely not. And it's really important for them to understand that. And of course, the other thing is when a narcissist, so yeah, you've got all these awful messages from your narcissist, but then you're going to get a reasonable sounding one. And you think, oh, they've seen the light, they've calmed down. They're normal again. Oh, good. And they'll lull you in with this kind of, thank you so much for picking up Felix. We'll use Felix again. Felix from the football match on Saturday. He had a lovely time. I'm really grateful. And you think, oh my God, that sounds normal. And that's just them trying to lull you in to an argument. So don't go, it was my pleasure and didn't he do well? Don't do that. Don't do that. Then it will start. Don't be drawn in. Oh, and another thing you could do is you could try and shame the narcissist. That's another communication tactic. Last resort, try and publicly shame them. Well, how would your mother feel if she finds out about this? That kind of thing. But it doesn't work with all of them, but it's something to consider if you have to. But those are the kind of top tips really for communicating with them, how you actually respond. But remember that the point is you've got to pick your battles here. They want a reaction from you. All of this is about reaction. And they're going to be awful. And that you're going to have to accept some really unfair behaviours from them. And with all your family going, no, you can't. Surely we must tell the lawyers or call the police and it's like, no, it's not going to work because you're going to be giving them supply. So only deal with the things that absolutely need to be dealt with. Because the narcissist once, I think it was Dr. Ramani that described, I thought it was, she's an American psychologist that talks about narcissism a lot. And that she explained it as a tennis match, which I thought was brilliant. So basically the narcissist serves the serve and they want you to return the ball. And then they want a volley. They want a volley that's going to escalate into a massive argument. That ball is the conversation that's just going to keep escalating. What you've got to do is when they serve, you've got to let them have their ace. You've got to put your racket down and you've got to walk off the court. Don't engage. Because if you're drawn into a battle, you've gone right back to square one. Right, it's right back to the beginning. And it's not like, I've been really good for a year and now I've got, it's fine, because you will have gone right back to square one. So you've got to be absolutely vigilant in the way that you communicate with a narcissist. Here I am saying, pick your battles and let them get away with loads of things. But there are certain things that you can't let them get away with. You can't just ignore certain things. And you've got to learn. And you, most likely, you've probably had rubbish boundaries. Because again, this is something that I hear a lot from my clients. I will say, how are you with boundaries? And they go, I'm terrible. They say no, and then they just let the person walk all over them. Most people who've been in a narcissistic relationship are really, really bad at boundaries. So you've got to learn to say no and you've got to stick to it. Narcissists will be pushing your boundaries all the time. Can we change the schedule? Can I do Thursday instead of Tuesday? You had Mother's Day, so can I have whatever? They'll be changing it all the time. You must be totally inflexible on your schedule. Totally inflexible. Do not ever change that, because everybody needs to know exactly where they are, even if it be more convenient for you to change. Be inflexible, because if you give an inch, they're going to take a mile and they're going to keep coming back to you. You don't need to give reasons. You can just say, or you can say, we already have plans for that day. But so that's really important. Absolutely do not allow them to change the schedule. No flexibility whatsoever, which is not what you do in a normal parenting situation ever. That, of course, you wouldn't. But with a narcissist, you have to. And you have to be really careful as well that it is likely that they're going to take you back to court at some point about something. So when you're communicating with them, I said about picking your battles and only responding to what you need to. What you can do as you get more proficient with this is realize that you can actually build your evidence over the next couple of years or however long it is, in case you end up in court. So you really do need to be thinking about a paper trail of their particularly bad behaviours. So I mentioned that example earlier about they're throwing away the school uniform, the children's school uniform. You can send them an email about that. Don't just go, oh, well, I'm going to have to put up with that. That's a really controlling thing to do. And that would make them look really bad in front of a judge. So you could pull them up on that in an email, not in an outraged way, but just point it out. They'll come back with some vitriol. And again, that will work against them in court.
There's a brilliant lawyer catchphrase that bounces around social media every so often, which is dance like nobody's watching, email like it's going to be read by a judge.
Oh, always remember that you do not want your communications, particularly if you lose it, to be read back to you in court. You are always writing for a judge, but you're also always writing. It becomes once the divorce is done and you're in that post-separation phase, you're now trying to basically trick the narcissist into getting when you can. So not all the time, but if you have to, if you think they're going to come back at you, you need to be just kind of being bounded, saying, this isn't acceptable, and then getting the vitriol back from them and building that paper trail, because that's basically how we do things. And in a couple of years, you'll have a whole load of things. And when they do take you to court saying they want 50-50 or whatever, they'll look like idiots and it won't happen. So that because you've built your evidence. But none of this is easy when you're being triggered into panic and freaking out, which is actually why it's really important to learn to, I talked about having that fear response and pretending that you're not scared, but actually you need to lower that fear response. You need to learn to raise the threshold at which your brain is triggered into that fear response. And I've mentioned this before. I mention it probably every time I do any type of podcast, but I really honestly can tell you that meditation and mindfulness actually does do that. And you can do courses. So MBCT, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, 8-week course, couple of hours, once a week. They teach you how to meditate. They go through how your brain works. It's absolutely brilliant. MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, is similarly good. I really, really do recommend doing that. And you can have them, they can be in person or online now. And that will just because you cannot go on for 12 years, 15 years being thrown into fear like that. You've got to get a handle on it. And I promise you that meditation and mindfulness works. And not only does it work quickly. It takes weeks to work. So really thoroughly recommend that very strongly.
Brilliant. There's loads and loads. We've talked a lot about the bad behaviours that the narcissist is going to exhibit, and you talk about the narcissist taking you back to court, which I've seen lots of examples of. Perhaps we should talk a little bit about what the family court can do, does do, should do, doesn't do, and any tips that you've got about dealing with that.
I think so many people think it's okay, the family court will be my salvation, but actually that's not going to happen, because a judge can make a child arrangements order, for example, and a narcissist can breach it or ignore it, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Say if they keep your child, you're supposed to have them back on, even if it's Christmas Day, you're supposed to collect them on Christmas Day, and they just won't let you take them. So you think, well, I know, I'll call the police because I've got a child arrangements order. The police won't get involved because it's child arrangements. So it's not a criminal issue. They won't get involved. So there's actually very little. If a narcissist decides they're going to breach a child arrangements order, there's very little you can actually do about it. So it does call into question, well, what's the point of fighting for 2 years to get a child arrangements order if it's just going to be ignored by a narcissist? But I think it can buy you some time. They will abide by the rules for some time, usually a year, 2 years, and then they'll start to flout the rules. So it can be worth it. So that's something to be really aware of. Nobody's going to be put in prison for breaching a child arrangements order, because they're not going to put parents in prison, because it's not in the best interests of the child. So that basically never happens. I think it's happened once.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically can happen, incredibly rare. I mean, the one thing that the court could do is not so much enforce the order, but vary it potentially. If you can show, and perhaps Lisa, and if you agree with me on this, if you can show that the behaviour is having an adverse impact on the child, then you can potentially then reduce the time that they are spending with the narcissistic parent. But that leads into the cycle that we were talking about earlier, where there's repeat applications and you have series, and there will be vexatious applications. And if you make that application to reduce the time, there will be a cross application to enforce it, and there will be allegations made by the narcissist that the non-narcissist is then exhibiting alienation. I mean, is this all sounding familiar to you, Lisa, from sort of your practice?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, if we have the Christmas example, if we have a breach of contact over Christmas, the handover doesn't take place, then Dr. Supriya is completely right. At that moment in time, there is absolutely nothing we can do. And I suppose the problem is that we then do have enforcement applications that we can make. The court can enforce penalties like fines and unpaid work, etc. But often, by the time you've got that application into court, you're then a number of months down the line, at which case you may be in a completely different situation. And to some extent, from listening to Dr. Supriya today, you're effectively feeding the narcissistic supply, because you're making another application and you're getting them into court again. So it feels like it's a catch-22, isn't it? The whole lot.
Yeah, you're returning the ball, aren't you? You're returning the ball. So it's that balance. It really is that balance. So having documentation that shows that they've done that will be useful possibly down the line, but you're not going to be able to march up to the gates or the front door with a policeman and get them back. And certainly, as you say, with the delays in the court system, it's not going to do anything in a timely fashion. So it's really important to understand that the courts is unlikely to be your salvation in the sense of them just breaching things and doing what they want and being late and all of that stuff. People talk about sort of out of court dispute resolution methods, and I've mentioned that mediation is a nightmare and doesn't work with narcissists, but there is a type of mediation that works, or that can work. It doesn't always work, it can work, and that's called hybrid mediation. So if you are going to mediate, even if you're only mediating to tick the box, basically, go for hybrid mediation, where you're in separate rooms, you've both got your lawyers with you, and you've got a specially trained hybrid mediator who can hold confidences. That's the difference between a hybrid mediator, the essential difference between a hybrid mediator and a normal mediator. So you can tell them stuff, they can hold it in their head. They don't have to tell the other person. They can tell them stuff, they can hold it in their head, and then they can negotiate an outcome knowing that they're holding stuff in their head. You can give them your bottom line on stuff, or you can tell them that the narcissist is a narcissist, and they won't go, oh, she just said this or he just said that, which is what has to happen in normal mediation. It's kind of transparent. So normal mediation doesn't work, but hybrid mediation can work for certain issues. The other thing is, if you do have a child arrangements order, do make sure it's really, really detailed. That's there's no point going to court and fighting for God knows how long to get a child arrangements order that's just woolly and doesn't actually nail down the details. So you want to know things like with the kind of schedule, how are the holidays split? What if there's, if it's 50-50, what happens if there's an extra day? Who gets that in which holiday? Which part of that holiday will each person have with the children? What happens with birthday arrangements for the children? Who's holding the passports? This is the biggest bone of contention, because you can really control a person by having the children's passports and not giving them back. That's massive. So really, and if you've been away with the child, or if the narcissist's been away with the child, how many days have they got to return the passport to you? That kind of really nail it down. They might not adhere to it forever, but they might adhere to it for a year or two, and that gives you some breathing space to be able to heal yourself, which is of course hugely important. You're constantly being triggered, you've probably got complex PTSD, got a lot of work to do on yourself, so that's likely to give you a breathing space. And the other thing to mention is a live with order. So if you're going for a child arrangements order, try to get a live with order. Basically, the reason for that is because you don't then have to ask the narcissist. You can take the child out of the UK without having to get the narcissist's permission for up to 28 days a year, which is incredibly freeing for people, basically. So that's definitely worth doing. It doesn't mean anything other than that. I don't know why it's called a live with order, really, because that's kind of what my understanding anyway is, that's what it means.
No, you're right. There's no other real practical impact of it other than not needing the consent removed from the jurisdiction for a holiday, provided you're not breaching the rest of the order. So you can't just say, well, I get 28 days whenever. It's, if you've got your week, you can go in that week without the consent, and that's something that you don't need to then go crawling, because if you're dealing with narcissists, they will say, well, where are you going? What time is your flight? What's this? Where are you staying? I'm going to call every single day to make sure the kid's all right, morning and night, and so just not having that gives you a bit more control back, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really useful to try to get a live with order, I think. And if you don't get a court order, try to get a detailed parenting plan instead that you both sign. It's not legally binding, but it might just, with a closet narcissist and one that's easily shamed, it might work. It depends on the narcissist. It's worth a try to try and get a detailed parenting plan if you're not, which is essentially what the child arrangements order is, but kind of like ratified by the courts. It might work with a sort of lower spectrum narcissist. And then this is really important. What I've noticed is that when people have been through this for years, it's when they represent themselves in court as a litigant in person. And they might have lawyers in the background under the radar, but they're not admitting to having. So lawyers that are off the record, and they might use a direct access barrister to actually represent them, do the cross-examination, etc. But it's that thing of actually representing yourself. If you can get to that point where you can at least look like you aren't scared to do that, and you can go to court and do that, that really takes away the narcissist's power. That's often the time when they go, do you know what, this isn't working anymore, and they do actually bugger off. That can be the turning point for people. In fact, that's very often the turning point.
Well, they will realise at that point that they're not spending money on lawyers because they're doing it themselves, and it's that financial abuse element of it falls away, doesn't it?
Exactly, that's been totally taken away. When you're in a situation, it's that "this too shall pass." Great quote. This too shall pass. It will pass, because when the children are 16, the power has gone, basically. If you've got a 2-year-old, that's little consolation, I know that. But it will pass. And actually it changes, because as the children get older, they get more and more power themselves. They might have a phone, so you don't have to contact, the narcissist doesn't have the excuse to contact you. They might be getting themselves to school on the bus, or going to their parents' house, the other parents' house on the bus, or they might be seeing friends after school and not wanting to go to see the narcissist at whatever, 5 p.m. on a Wednesday, or whatever's down in the order. And they'll be able to say, no, I'm going out with so-and-so. Those types of things, that all changes as they get older. So it does get better. I promise it gets better. If you can use all these things that we've talked about today, you can, I think, I'm confident that you can make things better. But there's a lot to think about, but it is possible.
Fabulous. Well, I mean, that's really incredibly helpful.
Good point to end on.
And some really good tips, I think, to finish. Thank you, Supriya. That's absolutely amazing.
So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. If you are at immediate risk of domestic abuse, please call the police or the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247. Further resources from Dr Supriya, including Narcissists in Divorce, which is one of the world's top 5% most downloaded podcasts, Supriya's online courses on narcissism available on drsupriya.com, and blog posts and more information about the work she does can be found on thelifedoctor.org. She also regularly posts insights on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. Her new book, The Narcissist Trap, The Mind-Bending Pull of the Great Pretenders, is just out now. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.